It's Monday and you're watching FreightWaves Now. I'm your host Anthony Smith, and coming up, Mike Bowdendistel is going to give us a rail intermodal update. But first, we're going to go to Zach Strickland with the carrier update brought to you by Powerfleet. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, and welcome to your carrier update presented by Powerfleet. I'm Zach Strickland. Hopefully everybody has had a restful and productive weekend and getting back into it on a Monday, ready to go. So, tender volumes, our outbound tender volume index for both van and reefer still continued to rise. It was the single best week in the freight market in terms of outbound tender volumes since mid-March, when we were still on that meteoric rise during the pandemic. Initial outbreak where the panic buying was really taking off. So the van volumes, again, were the big factor in that last week. We see van really taking off all the way up over 7,200 on the van outbound tender volume index, moderating a little bit, again, a little bit of a weekend impact here as we continue this stair step, but you can clearly see volumes accelerated tremendously last week. On the van side, reefer as well. Until the very end of the week, reefer volumes did hit a little bit of a plateau, a little wall there at the end of the week. We have been seeing a lot more moderating trend on a Friday since this pandemic. It may be a little bit of psychology here, as a lot of people are starting to, maybe since they are working from home a lot more, a little bit of an industrial rhythm here, but it's falling off a lot faster on Friday. You guys may notice that out there in the world. Not as much spot market activity, not as many load tenders coming through on a Friday as people might be trying to take a longer weekend, etc. So again, something that we're going to be watching moving forward as we start to return to some semblance of normal. But the tender volume indices, not that far off where we would anticipate this time of year. I'm not considering 2019 to be a normal year by any means, because it was very soft in May. So I would still expect us to see a little bit higher volumes in a traditional year at this point in time, especially as we're starting to approach the Memorial Day holiday, which again could be having an impact on the volumes as well, as people are trying to get stuff out before the holiday here this week. So what is it doing to rejection rates? Not a lot on the van side. We're still sitting right around 2.9% on the outbound tender rejection index for vans, about a 7.79% on reefer rejection. So there is a little bit more upward trajectory on the reefer tender rejection index, as we would anticipate. A lot more volatile sector in the truckload industry. Not as much blanket coverage throughout the United States. Van still sitting down in a very historically low period, so do not expect a lot of significant upward rate pressure on the spot market at this point in time. Checking out the weighted rejection index, combination of market share and tender rejection weekly change. Not a lot of activity as you would expect in terms of what I was talking about with tender rejection rates being pretty low, not moving off that floor just yet. Except for in the reefer side. A very, very bland map on that end of the thing, so you're not seeing a lot of activity. Here's Ontario, the only kind of darkish blue sector on there, with a 5.675 weighted rejection index, indicating a pretty decent upward trajectory over the last week or so. Bouncing down through here, though, there's just not a lot of big numbers, so there's not a lot of big changes here. Minneapolis, Los Angeles, Portland, Phoenix, and then Denver, of all places, showing back up again. We've got Fresno, California, as well, sitting on the map again, right around that produce area in Central California. But the market I want to target today is Denver. Denver, kind of an anomaly this year in terms of you don't necessarily want to go into it, but it just keeps hanging on. Volumes start to spike, tender rejections even spiking out of the Denver market. Looking over here, you've got the outbound tender volume index in the orange line and the outbound tender rejection index in Denver for the blue line there. 7.28% outbound tender rejection rate in Denver market. Again, not necessarily what you would expect, especially this time of year out of Denver, but a lot of carriers don't go in there. So there's probably not a lot of inbound fueling that market, keeping capacity a little bit under what you'd expect. Head haul volatility, however, negative 6.52%, indicating there's still more trucks going in than coming out, but only slightly, and it is moving up at a pretty quick clip there to 5.1%, with those outbound volumes really taking off here in the next little bit. So that'll do it for today's carrier update.
The comprehensive logistics offerings from PowerFleet cover in-cab ELD, fleet management, trailer tracking, cargo monitoring, and tracking other assets such as chassis and intermodal containers. Power up your operations with PowerFleet.
Welcome to your rail intermodal update. I'm here with Mike Bowden-Distel. Mike, what's the latest?
Well, we've just heard from Zach talking about outbound tender volume index surging last week. So I think it's helpful to compare that to some other data series and see what those other data series are doing to see if those confirm or deny what's happening there. With intermodal containers, so this blue line is from the AAR, Association of American Railroads, and you see some modest improvement, but nothing like we're seeing in truckload, nothing like we're seeing in reefer trucking volumes and those things. And then this green line, which is U.S. Customs data. So these are containerized and non-containerized customs. It looks kind of like a cactus. I mean, it sort of had this big spike in May, and now it's coming down pretty significantly. Now, it does take a couple weeks oftentimes before, from the time when customs hit the docks until those translate into truckloads. And so, I suspect a lot of those volumes that are going on the truck came in during these high periods in late April, early May. A lot of that freight, should have moved earlier in the year and was pushed to sort of that point. And that at least contributes to some of the strong truckload volumes that we're seeing. So I do suspect this sort of portends a falling off in some of the transportation volumes that we're seeing. So I think that's an important point.
And doesn't really exactly translate into intermodal volumes as much, right?
Equipment type. It contributes to intermodal volumes, but there's some of the imports can stay local to an area, stay local to say the Los Angeles metro area. Others can be warehoused, in or near Southern California and Ontario. I have some data on the next slide that will go into that in a little bit more detail. But here is the Freightos Baltic Daily Index, and these are the only daily index for steamship rates. And what you see here is, from China to the West Coast, you really saw a huge surge. So those sort of correspond with, in May. That big spike in imports. You also saw an increase in rates on the ocean during that period of time. Now, the biggest reason for that has been a reduction in capacity in the blank sailings. The blank sailings in May and June, about 20% of the sailings were canceled. In July, it looks like it's going to be more like 10%, at least so far. Now that could rise, but it does seem like the steamship lines are having just as much trouble forecasting volumes as anyone else has. It almost seems like they overshot it a little bit, and some of those containers that were going to go on certain sailings were having to get pushed to other sailings. Kind of interesting that we haven't seen quite the same degree of surge in ocean rates to the East Coast of the U.S., primarily because some of the more time-sensitive shipments might come through the West because you can get those on the surface faster, and also I just think there was less capacity taken out from going to the East Coast. So those are two things there. On the next slide, or I guess that might be what we have for today. But
yeah, awesome, Mike. I mean, this has been insightful as always. Thank you so much for that update, and thank you so much for tuning in for this Rail Intermodal update. As always, we're always streaming around the clock, so don't forget to check out our FreightWaves TV app and all your favorite streaming platforms. Stay tuned, and we'll see you on the next episode.